They represent about 25% of the American population. Yet they've shaped Supreme Court decisions, elected presidents, passed state laws, and dominated political conversations for decades. No politician seeking national office can afford to ignore them. Presidential candidates make pilgrimages to their universities and megachurches. Their endorsements can make or break campaigns. Their priorities become party platforms. They are white evangelical Christians, and they wield political influence far beyond their numbers. In the 2016 election, 81% of them voted the same way. In 2020, 84%. This level of political unity is extraordinary in a diverse democracy. No other religious group, no other demographic votes so consistently as a bloc. But here's what's fascinating. For most of American history, evangelicals avoided politics. They believed the church should focus on saving souls, not shaping laws. They warned against mixing faith and politics. They stayed out of the political arena. So what changed? How did a group that once preached separation from worldly politics become the most powerful voting bloc in American politics? How did evangelicals go from cultural outsiders to political kingmakers? The answer involves Supreme Court decisions, cultural anxiety, strategic organizing, and a fundamental shift in how evangelicals understood their role in American society. This is the story of evangelical political power, how it was built, why it endures, and what it means for American democracy. For most of the 20th century, evangelicals were largely apolitical. They focused on personal salvation, evangelism, and living separately from what they saw as a sinful world. Politics was considered worldly, corrupt, a distraction from the real work of saving souls. This began to change in the 1960s and 70s. A series of Supreme Court decisions and cultural shifts convinced many evangelicals that American society was moving away from Christian values, and that remaining politically uninvolved was no longer an option. In 1962 and 1963, the Supreme Court ruled that mandatory prayer and Bible reading in public schools were unconstitutional. For many Christians, particularly evangelicals, this felt like an attack on faith itself. Schools had always been spaces where Christian values were reinforced. Now they were declared secular zones. Then came the sexual revolution of the 1960s. Divorce rates climbed. Premarital sex became more common and accepted. The birth control pill gave women reproductive control. Traditional family structures that evangelicals saw as biblically ordained seemed to be collapsing. In 1973, the Supreme Court's decision in Roe v. Wade legalized abortion nationwide. This became the galvanizing issue that would mobilize evangelical political activism for the next 50 years. The 1960s and 70s created what many evangelicals experienced as a crisis. It felt like Christian America was disappearing. The culture that had once reinforced Christian values, at least on the surface, was becoming hostile to those values. Many evangelicals concluded that if they didn't get politically involved, they would lose everything. But abortion alone didn't mobilize evangelicals politically. Many evangelical leaders initially saw abortion as a Catholic issue. Some even supported limited abortion rights in cases of rape or when the mother's life was endangered. What really mobilized evangelicals was a threat to their institutions, specifically to Christian schools. In the 1970s, many white evangelicals established private Christian schools. Some of these schools were created in response to desegregation, though leaders publicly emphasized religious reasons. These schools claimed tax-exempt status as religious institutions. In 1978, the IRS moved to revoke tax-exempt status from Christian schools that practiced racial discrimination. This threatened the financial viability of these institutions. It also represented, in many evangelicals' view, government intrusion into religious autonomy. This IRS action, more than any other single issue, mobilized evangelicals into political action. They saw it as government persecution of Christian institutions. It created a sense of urgency of existential threat. One prominent pastor reflected years later, "What mobilized us was the perception that the government was coming after our institutions, after our ability to educate our children in our values. That's when we realized we had to fight. This is when strategic political organizing began. In 1979, a political activist and several evangelical leaders founded the Moral Majority, an organization explicitly designed to mobilize conservative Christians into political action. Their message was clear. America was founded as a Christian nation, Christian values were under attack, and Christians needed to reclaim America through political power. The Moral Majority registered voters, educated Christians on political issues, endorsed candidates, and mobilized church members to vote. They focused on what they called family values: opposition to abortion, opposition to gay rights, support for prayer in schools, opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment. This was revolutionary. Evangelicals who had been taught that politics was worldly and corrupting were now being told that political involvement was a Christian duty, that failing to vote or engage politically was abandoning America to secularism. Mobilizing voters was just the beginning. What made evangelical political power durable was the infrastructure they built: networks, organizations, media, and institutions that could sustain political engagement across decades. Christian radio and television became powerful tools for political messaging. Religious broadcasters reached millions of evangelical homes weekly. They didn't just preach the gospel, they preached politics. They told their audiences which candidates to support, which issues to care about, how to vote in alignment with Christian values. One broadcaster told his audience, "A vote for this candidate is a vote against God. A vote for that candidate is a vote for biblical values. You cannot be a faithful Christian and vote the wrong way." This created what political scientists call elite cue-taking. Evangelical voters looked to trusted religious leaders for political guidance. When pastors and broadcasters spoke with one voice, their congregations followed. Evangelical political organizations proliferated. Groups focused on specific issues: pro-life advocacy, traditional marriage, religious liberty, parental rights. They produced voter guides, hosted candidate forums, lobbied legislators, and filed lawsuits. These organizations were sophisticated, professional, and well-funded. They hired lawyers, political strategists, communications experts. They learned how to work the political system as effectively as any secular lobby. What's remarkable about evangelical political organizing is its professionalization. These weren't just passionate volunteers. These were sophisticated operations with multimillion-dollar budgets, database-driven voter targeting, and strategic coordination across states. They built the kind of infrastructure that could win elections. Evangelical political power also benefited from geographic concentration. Evangelicals are heavily concentrated in the South and rural areas across America. This concentration translates into disproportionate political influence in several ways. First, it gives evangelicals dominant influence in many state legislatures, particularly in the South and Midwest. In states like Alabama, Mississippi, and Oklahoma, evangelical voters are the majority. Candidates cannot win without their support. This allows evangelicals to shape state-level policy on education, abortion, religious expression, and social issues. Second, geographic concentration gives evangelicals outsized influence in the Electoral College and the Senate. Because these institutions give extra weight to less populous states, and because evangelicals dominate in many of these states, their political power exceeds their percentage of the national population. Third, concentration creates self-reinforcing political communities. In areas where evangelicals are the majority, their political views become normalized. Churches coordinate political activity. Social pressure encourages political conformity. Moving away from evangelical political positions can mean social exclusion. The infrastructure also includes educational institutions. Evangelical colleges and universities train future leaders, pastors, teachers, lawyers, politicians. These institutions explicitly integrate conservative politics with Christian faith, producing graduates who see political conservatism as inseparable from biblical Christianity. And then there's the local church network. With tens of thousands of evangelical churches across America, meeting weekly, reaching millions of people, churches became the most effective voter mobilization network in American politics. Pastors could reach their entire congregation with a single sermon. They could distribute voter guides. They could organize transportation to polls. They could create a culture where political engagement was seen as spiritual duty. One pastor explained his approach. "I tell my congregation that we're in a spiritual war, and politics is one battlefield in that war. If they don't vote, if they don't engage, they're surrendering ground to the enemy." That's powerful motivation. This infrastructure, media, organizations, geographic concentration, educational institutions, and church networks created a political machine that could be activated reliably every election cycle. It's why evangelicals vote at higher rates than most other groups. It's why they vote so consistently as a bloc. It's why politicians court them so aggressively. Political power requires not just organization but unity. And evangelicals have achieved remarkable unity around a core set of issues that transcend other differences. Abortion is the central unifying issue. For many evangelicals, abortion is not a political preference but a moral absolute, the taking of innocent human life. This framing makes compromise impossible and makes abortion the single most important political issue for many evangelical voters. A voter explained it this way: "I might disagree with a candidate on taxes or healthcare or foreign policy, but if they support abortion, I cannot vote for them. Because what's more important than protecting innocent life? Everything else is secondary." This single-issue focus gives evangelicals tremendous political leverage. Candidates seeking evangelical support know they must have the right position on abortion. There's no room for nuance or compromise. The second major unifying issue is traditional marriage and sexuality. Evangelicals largely oppose same-sex marriage, transgender rights, and what they see as the broader sexual revolution. They frame this as defending biblical sexuality and protecting children from harmful ideologies. When same-sex marriage was legalized nationwide in 2015, it galvanized evangelical political engagement. Many saw it as evidence that America had rejected Christian values and that the church needed to fight back politically. Religious liberty has become another central issue, particularly in recent years. Evangelicals argue that Christian individuals and institutions are increasingly penalized for holding traditional beliefs. Bakers punished for refusing to make cakes for same-sex weddings. Christian adoption agencies forced to close for not placing children with gay couples. Christian schools threatened with loss of accreditation for traditional sexual ethics. Whether these concerns are overblown or legitimate, they're deeply felt within evangelical communities. They create a siege mentality, a sense that Christians are under attack and must defend themselves through political power. What makes evangelicals politically powerful is not just that they have strong views, but that they have shared strong views. They agree on what matters most. This unity allows them to coordinate politically in ways that more diverse groups cannot. When you have 75 or 80% of a demographic agreeing on key issues, you have a powerful voting bloc. These shared issues create what political scientists call effective polarization, not just disagreement on policy but moral judgment of those who disagree. Many evangelicals see political opponents not as people with different views but as threats to Christian values, to children, to America itself. This moral framing raises the stakes. It's not just about policy preferences. It's about good versus evil, righteousness versus sin, God's kingdom versus Satan's agenda. When politics is framed in these ultimate terms, compromise becomes betrayal. One evangelical leader put it starkly: "We're not fighting over tax rates or healthcare systems. We're fighting for the soul of America. We're fighting for our children's future. We're fighting against forces that want to destroy everything we hold sacred. How can we compromise on that?" This framing also explains why character issues that might disqualify candidates in other contexts are overlooked by evangelical voters when the candidate supports their key issues. Concerns about personal morality are secondary to concerns about policy positions on abortion, religious liberty, and traditional values. The practical argument goes like this: we're not electing a pastor. We're electing a political leader who will appoint judges, sign or veto bills, and protect our interests. Personal character is less important than policy positions. This pragmatic approach to politics has been controversial, even within evangelical communities. Some evangelicals have argued that supporting candidates with questionable character undermines Christian witness. But the majority have concluded that policy outcomes matter more than personal virtue in political leaders. Evangelical political power is inseparable from the Republican Party. While not all evangelicals are Republicans, white evangelicals vote Republican at rates exceeding 75% in most elections, and often higher than 80% in presidential races. This alliance wasn't inevitable. In the 1970s, evangelicals were divided politically. Some supported Democrats, particularly Southern Democrats who shared their cultural conservatism. But over time, the Republican Party deliberately courted evangelical voters while the Democratic Party moved left on social issues. The Republican Party offered evangelicals something crucial: access to power. Republican candidates attended evangelical churches, spoke at Christian universities, quoted scripture, and promised to advance evangelical priorities. They pledged to appoint conservative judges, restrict abortion, protect religious liberty, and defend traditional marriage. In return, evangelicals delivered votes, volunteers, and organizational support. They became the Republican Party's most reliable voting bloc. The Evangelical-Republican alliance is mutually beneficial but also mutually constraining. Republicans cannot win without evangelical support, which means they must prioritize evangelical issues even when those issues might alienate moderate voters. And evangelicals have tied their identity so closely to the Republican Party that questioning the party can feel like questioning the faith. This alliance has reshaped American politics. It's moved the Republican Party significantly to the right on social issues. It's made certain policy positions, like opposition to abortion rights, virtually mandatory for Republican candidates. It's created a political dynamic where evangelicals view Democratic victories as existential threats. The alliance also means that evangelical political priorities have become Republican political priorities. When evangelicals care deeply about Supreme Court appointments, Republicans prioritize appointing conservative judges. When evangelicals oppose LGBTQ rights expansions, Republicans position themselves as defenders of religious liberty. When evangelicals want prayer in schools or religious exemptions from regulations, Republicans work to provide them. This has been remarkably successful in achieving evangelical political goals. Conservative Supreme Court appointments have reshaped constitutional law. State legislatures dominated by Republicans have passed hundreds of abortion restrictions. Religious liberty protections have been expanded in many states. But the close association with the Republican Party has costs. It's alienated younger evangelicals who don't share their parents' political views. It's made evangelicalism seem more like a political identity than a religious one. It's divided churches, with some members feeling that the church has become too political, too partisan, too focused on power rather than the gospel. One younger evangelical expressed frustration. "I go to church and it feels like a Republican rally. The pastor talks more about politics than about Jesus. I believe in the gospel, but I don't recognize this version of Christianity that's so focused on political power." Despite these tensions, the Evangelical-Republican alliance remains strong. For most white evangelicals, the Republican Party is the only viable political home. They see Democrats as hostile to Christian values, as the party of abortion rights, secular progressivism, and challenges to religious liberty. So why are evangelicals so politically powerful? They built infrastructure, organizations, media networks, church mobilization systems. They achieved unity around core moral issues that transcend other differences. They concentrated geographically in ways that amplify their electoral influence. And they allied with a political party that gave them access to power in exchange for reliable votes. But evangelical political power is more than organizational effectiveness. It's rooted in a theological conviction that America is, or should be, a Christian nation, that Christian values should shape law and culture, and that political engagement is not optional but a religious duty. This conviction motivates evangelicals to vote at high rates, to prioritize politics in ways that other religious groups often don't, and to sustain political engagement across decades. The result is a level of political influence disproportionate to their numbers. 25% of the population shapes national conversations, determines election outcomes, influences Supreme Court composition, and drives state-level policymaking. Whether you see this as appropriate religious participation in democracy or as dangerous theocratic influence depends largely on where you stand. But what's undeniable is that evangelical political power has fundamentally reshaped American politics over the past 40 years. As America becomes more diverse and more secular, as younger generations move away from evangelical Christianity, the future of evangelical political power is uncertain. Will it continue to shape American politics for another generation, or will demographic and cultural changes erode the foundation of evangelical influence? What's certain is this: understanding American politics requires understanding evangelical political power, how it was built, why it endures, and what it seeks to accomplish. Because for the past 40 years, and likely for years to come, no force has shaped American political life quite like the political mobilization of evangelical Christians.